So let me see. Let me check if we are live, but I believe so. Let me make a final check, but yeah, we are live. Perfect. So I think we just have to wait a couple of seconds until more people join. But yeah, here there are a lot of new people. Before we dive deeper, before we make the first introductions, please let us know if the sound is all right and everything. We have a new setup today, so there might be something wrong with the mic. And yeah, now let's talk. Let's introduce our guest first before we talk about IBC and the nearest near integration. Today I talked to Susannah Evans. She is the product lead at the ICF, at the Interchain GmbH. Then we have also Blas and 0xBrainjar from Composable Finance on the show. And sadly, Trevor from Croncats wasn't able to make it. But yeah, before we dive deeper, would be super cool if each of you could introduce yourself very quickly to all the people who may not know you. So maybe Susannah, you want to start?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Susannah. I started at interchain GmbH in May, moving into the IBC product lead role. Like previously, Charlie was doing the product lead stuff, and she expanded the team. So we have me, Addy, who's been doing a lot of research and content, and Thomas doing dev roles there. And before that, I was actually working at Zero Knowledge Validator. And yeah, before that, I was doing a PhD in bioprinting, completely unrelated to cryptocurrency at all.
Nice. Maybe 0xBrainjar, you want to pick it up from here?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of Composable. Our intention is to bring IBC to as many chains as fundamentally possible, so that we can enable sort of the next generation of decentralized applications built with our infrastructure for interoperability, XCVM.
Yeah, my name is Blas. I've been leading the near efforts in Composable, now joining to work across all bridging efforts. Very happy to be part of this panel, and I really want also IBC to be the next standard in blockchain.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about this, and there are so many exciting things that are going on, especially on your end, 0xBrainjar and Blas with Composable, also with the recent near implementation that is ongoing right now, as far as I understood it right. But before we dive into this specifically, Susannah, could you maybe briefly explain how IBC works and why it is on average a little bit more safer than most of the fragile token bridges where we have seen so many exploits in the past weeks and months? So how does IBC actually work? Where's the advantage?
Okay, so the main differentiator of IBC over other bridging protocols is that the IBC is designed to rely on the underlying consensus mechanisms of the two blockchains that are communicating. So it does this by using light science to check the consensus state of the other chain that you want to send a message to, or maybe a token, or interact with. So this means that you're not trusting some other third party, like a multi-sig or another, like a smaller validator set, or just like a key value pair signing system, which means that it has like higher security guarantees than lots of other bridges that we see that have been hacked in the past. Like I think the Harmony bridge was just like a multi-sig bridge, for instance. But yeah, so that's like the main like security benefits of IBC, but it's also just giving like a standard format for these messages to be sent between blockchains. So it's kind of offering a standard for chains to adhere to, as like Blas and 0xBrainjar mentioned, through the transport layer, which is also something really powerful about IBC. So it's not just like the security benefits, it's also giving like, you know, a standardized way for chains to actually communicate with one another.
Yeah, I think this is very important to repeat this real quick before we dive very deep into the details of also shipping IBC to near and why it makes so much sense to expand IBC across the whole industry. But speaking of that, BrainJar, I remember when you tweeted about the approval from the near co-founder Ilya Poloshkin that he would be keen to support your recent governance proposal, but before we dive deep here, could you maybe repeat real quick at which stage Composable is to bring IBC to near, what the plan is, how it started, and why it is important? So just that we know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so as a as a Polkadot parachain, we were sort of, you know, we are interested in sort of Rust-based chains from a bridging perspective, and so Near was a very logical sort of next ecosystem to look into. Also because you know, unlike Solana, where there are no sort of like client implementations in Solana, the Near ecosystem really prioritized like having these fundamental core infrastructure pieces from day one. And so it was a very natural place for us to start looking towards extending IBC, especially sort of like, yeah, I guess essentially we were working on this bridge to Cosmos that we've been talking about so many different times. But I think our near efforts really then was a sort of mental model for us to start thinking about, all right, what are the requirements necessary in general for us to be able to approach more and more ecosystems, especially as we look to things like Polygon and ETH2 down the line. You know, how can we formalize / generalize our efforts overall? And so the efforts for Near sort of started out as a kind of experimental sort of stealth mode concept. Like, is this even really possible? We quickly realized that it was possible, but required sort of improvement proposals to actually make this possible. And so understanding that that essentially my job is turning into politics, basically, I realized that this would take like multiple months for us to actually get something like this through. So we decided to like really move quickly with like making a proposal, speaking to the core team and establishing those relationships so that, you know, once this could get approved, we'd have all the resources necessary to actually like finish building the full sort of scope of the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's cool, and I think that's very interesting what you mentioned, the struggle with all the governance proposals. I can definitely imagine that. And before I give the word now to Blas, who will maybe can give us an insight into the technical side of things, what is precisely happening right now with the Near implementation, it would be like good to know, Susannah, what is actually required to be generally able to bring IBC to any certain blockchain? Is it just that that a chain has to offer light client support, or are there other criteria that you would look at?
So there's a set of like specifications which are defined for the IBC protocol, and our team is like working on the specifications, but we also work on the Go implementation, which was the first IBC implementation. So this is obviously adhering to the specs, and with the Go implementation, we are using the Tendermint light client because the first kind of IBC use case was with Tendermint and Cosmos SDK chains. However, if you can have a light client for another consensus mechanism, so for instance, you've got the Beefy light client that Composable have been working on, and then you'd have the implementation in Rust, then you can also use IBC there. And I guess to have the like optimum security guarantees, you want to be able to use IBC with a light client. However, you can use a Sailing machine client, which is just verifying that like a transaction has been sent in like a different way. So this could just be like a kind of proof of authority, single key value pair signing, or a multi-signature kind of setup, which is just verifying that the transaction actually occurred. But obviously, if you use this approach, you're not going to get the same security guarantees as if you were using a light client. But some of the challenges in like actually having a light client implementation, which is going to work with IBC, is that it's like not like a, well, to make it work in the easiest way, you need to work with chains that have instant finality. So this is why, for instance, it's a challenge to connect to like Ethereum or Bitcoin now with IBC, because they don't have instant finality and they have probabilistic finality consensus mechanisms. There are like workaround solutions, but yeah, essentially, if you can have a light client which is going to fulfill the specifications, then you would be able to use IBC, or you can use this solo machine approach.
Yeah, that's actually very, very good to know. And I think all what you just said is like also very important for the further expansion of IBC. BrainJar, you mentioned it earlier. Your near implementation started somewhat as an experiment, but now it would be super interesting to know from you, Blas, where are you guys with the implementation? I've read that you were requesting an endpoint and that you requested the near community to enable a batching mechanism for transactions. So could you unpack all of this? So where are we, and what did you request from the near blockchain to enable?
Yes. So yeah, initially we tried to do like an overall document to understand what was the delta between what near had and what we needed. Essentially went to what Susannah was listing, and we found out that there was many of the things were actually there near. So we just said, okay, let's just dive into. And so one thing that I realized that is very important is that as we pave the way on IBC into different chains, other chains start being more positive on this, and they see it as a need. This is also very important for us because it reduces the amount of time you have to wait for them to implement the missing features. So essentially going to the things that we actually needed was some elements on signature verification, some what's called post functions. It's called functions that you can call from smart contracts, for example, for verifying signatures coming from other chains. That was one element. Other things were verifying proofs of transactions that were there, but there were no verification of proof for the state of the smart contracts. So that was something that they actually had the comment that said to do. This is useful for IBC from like 2-3 years ago. So it was funny just to see it like, okay, 2-3 years afterwards, we're coming there. It's just getting there. And then like after that, it's just optimizing. It's okay. We got all the bits and pieces. How do we put this so in a way that it doesn't cost that much verifying the state of the chain, whatever you are. So that's essentially what it is. And then I'd say the appendix is a bit more on a higher level. It's like things such as token standards, things like this. Is how do you reconcile different models across chains. So that's what we're like, as we are like progressing, we start seeing things on those levels, but that shows that like essentially like the connections, the verifications and all this, they're just there. Now it's a matter of like putting all things together, putting demo, going to testnet and then mainnet.
Yeah, I think this was like a very important insight here, and maybe this is maybe a pleb question if you want to say it like this. But how can I imagine it in the future, BrainJar? So, what is basically the end goal of what you guys are implementing here? Can I imagine it like this, like timeline-wise? Hey, in 1 or 2 years, I have a near address in my Kepler wallet, and I can seamlessly deploy assets from near to osmosis, similar to how I would do it nowadays with, let's say, my Atom tokens. So what will the UX, for example, look like? And when will we be there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been spending a lot of time building what we're calling XCVM, which is essentially our interoperability framework for sort of orchestration. So what all of that basically means is a world, like I'm envisioning a world in which you're able to, liquidity provide, perform swaps, invest in loans, and, open up positions on, say, DYDX, sort of all through a single interface with a single set of logic that lets you be able to pass IBC messages from chain to chain to pass these instructions, basically. And so with this single interface, you're then able to build a pretty streamlined user experience where the user could maintain a set. We have this thing called the Composable Name Service, CNS, that lets you map your wallets across multiple different chains. So for instance, Near Wallet, Kepler Wallets, Polkadot.js, etc. We're also making a situation where if you don't already have a wallet in these ecosystems, a private key can basically single private key that you just sort of note down and store securely is associated with multiple different addresses across these different ecosystems. So point of the matter is basically we're hoping there is a world like in the next few months, especially with the first integration going live between Cosmos and Polkadot, then hopefully Near shortly thereafter, to start showing the world what we mean by sort of these asynchronous execution pathways for this kind of higher order sort of DeFi activities that I'm hoping sort of spans something much bigger than just something like interchain accounts. You can think about XCVM as sort of being a superset of interchain accounts where users can now control their flow of funds and activities across multiple chains, all from sort of one interface.
And did I understand you right? You said months and not years?
I mean, so timelines are not my favorite thing to promise on podcasts, but yeah, basically, like we're hoping from a sort of Cosmos perspective to be able to show something on mainnet, hopefully before the end of the year. And then from a Near perspective, we're definitely keen on shipping something shortly thereafter. So from a timeline perspective, we're definitely not talking, from a multiple year perspective, like that's kind of how I'm thinking about integrating essentially every sort of chain of interest. So things like Aptos, anything that is sort of IBC compliant, we want to add within the next 1 to 2 years. But the fundamental infrastructure to do these types of integrations and XCVM itself, the framework, hopefully can go live before the end of the year.
Yeah, that would be absolutely massive, and also would be also very keen to see what you guys will also announce at Cosmoverse, which is actually today in 4 weeks, which is absolutely crazy. But yeah, Susannah, what I would be like interesting to know, what I would be like very interesting in knowing is, so Brainjar mentioned it before, we are still in this experimental phase right now. So it's not just a press on a button and then IBCs on a certain chain, but what will this look like in the future, in your opinion? Will we have at some point a game book where we say, okay, this needs to be done, and then we can ship IBC to every chain, let's say within a week or so? So what is the future of the expansion of IBC? Will it be easier and faster to implement IBC in, let's say, 2 years from now?
Well, I guess there's two ways to expand IBC. There's the kind of light approach, which Composable are like spearheading, or there is this solo machine approach that I mentioned earlier. So the solo machine approach is a lot easier, but as I mentioned, it's compromising on security guarantees. but this would be kind of reinforcing the IBC transport semantics as becoming a standard quicker. I'm more of the belief that the light client approach is better, because I think bridges, like in general, is already kind of something that people are worried about. Not that IBC is just a bridge, it's, you know, a general message passing protocol as well, and it's more than just bridging, but it is at the end of the day associated with bridging, and token transfer is like the prime use case of IBC right now. But I guess there's only like a limited number of like different consensus mechanisms that exist. So I guess in 2 years you would expect to see more light clients existing that would cover like these different consensus mechanisms that could be compliant with the IBC specs. So just in terms of like more light clients existing, then it could be easier to implement IBC on more chains. But I think like from seeing Composable do the work, like it's not a trivial task to like write these light clients and make sure that they're going to be working, you know, as they should to make IBC like function. It's not like a trivial task, even though I would say it's the better approach. So I think hopefully, I mean, I think first we need to wait for like the Cosmos Polkadot IBC connection to be live. But I think once like one chain beyond like Cosmos Tendermint chain is live, I think it would probably be like faster to implement chains in the future, because there will be like learnings from like what you guys have done. And yeah, I'm hoping as well people will see the power of IBC being something beyond just Cosmos alone. I mean, there's already interest from some other chains as well. Like, I think like Polygon were vaguely interested in some stuff, and there was some discussion with Filecoin around whether they could integrate with IBC in the future. So, you know, people are talking about it, but I think these things take time to be done properly. But I think in 2 years' time, there could be really a lot more stuff. But yeah, ultimately, I don't think it's going to get that much easier, but probably like a little bit easier.
Yeah, nice, and nice to hear that, definitely. But you mentioned Filecoin, so is the project generally keen to enable IBC, and do they have light client support? Correct, right?
So Filecoin has like some kind of shade of proof of work consensus mechanism, but I think they have plans to implement a kind of subnet architecture. So from my understanding, in the future, it could be possible to have a kind of Cosmos subnet, which would then make it easier to implement IBC with. But the like conversation that I've been involved with, and there was someone who applied for a grant, like it's just basically very early stage, and the kind of best technical approach that should be like investigated is kind of undetermined at this point. It's very much just exploratory.
Okay, I see. Yeah, very interesting to follow this development as well. But now, Blas, I want to ask you, because Susannah mentioned that she prioritizes or favorizes the light client support approach. Would you agree on that? So would you also say that this is a safer way to expand IBC? And would the other way around be also a potential threat for IBC in general? Because if we would see an IBC hack here or there, I think that would be, you know, a small disaster, so to say. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I agree. That's for one. Our vision is completely this one, but I also think that, you know, in any approach that is taken, there's also the smart contract risk. I mean, no matter what you do, you are as good as the chain itself, but also as good as the developers and the auditors building the smart contracts and the entire infrastructure. So it's not because you say that you're going to do IBC and light clients, there's no risk. So this is also something that we really need to, you know, be careful when we communicate, and also when we build.
I see. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yes, Susannah, please go on.
But just something to add, like IBC is inherently designed to kind of have fault isolation. So if there was someone trying to falsely update like a light client, for instance, the light client, like say the next header is actually like a valid update. The one before was containing some invalid transactions. The light client would like recognize this and just shut down. So although like, you know, in theory something could be done in like a light client sense, like the inherent design is to like isolate the fault so it wouldn't like spread throughout the whole network. But with like the solo machine approach, I guess in theory it could be easier to try and submit like a false transaction or something like this.
So there is kind of a protection in between. So this would be like our safety net, so to say.
Yeah, if like there is some kind of discrepancy in like two updates of a light client, this would like shut the light client down, and also relays can like submit evidence of like misbehavior, which would also shut down the light client. So there are like some in like kind of fault tolerance mechanisms built in, and I'm aware that Osmosis are currently implementing a rate limiting middleware. So that would be to actually like put limits on how much like volume of a token can be transferred in and out in a certain time limit. So this is also like another protection which is possible to apply to IBC. So
okay.
yeah, I mean that
would be our safety net.
Yeah, there's just like there's quite a few things that can be done basically, and yeah, it's nice.
I see. Yeah, I see. Yeah. I think that's a very important thing to mention here, because the past bridge hacks made many people like curious how safe also IBC is, and it's good to know that we kind of have a small insurance there. But yeah, Brainjar, you mentioned also like very slightly at the beginning, and I also read your tweet that you're also working on bringing IBC to all networks that have light client support, so including Polygon. I also believe that Avalanche has light client support. So what does the development look like? So what are next potential chains besides Near and Polkadot to enable IBC? So yeah, can you share some insights here, and when will we reach the stage where almost every chain could be IBC enabled?
Oh yeah. So yeah, so we're intending definitely, like, you know, when I say we're looking into these things, it's really just strictly research at this point, but we are looking into Polygon and ETH2 as sort of like the next focus. We've also been researching Aptos as well. So I think the sort of focus will be Polkadot to Cosmos, then the Near integration, and then hoping to, you know, produce these other integrations, hopefully like Q1, Q2 of next year. So, I mean, as Susannah mentioned, these things are not trivial. But you know, we invest so much time and effort into these things because we believe that, you know, fundamentally there won't be a world in 5 years where validator-based bridges and something like layer 0 exists anymore, that everything will just be IBC, or at least giving users this trustless option, I think is super, super important, especially just like at some point, this narrative of like, oh yeah, let's ship a trusted bridge so that we can get adoption and sort of ignore the sort of trustlessness work and the trustlessness option. I'm pleased to see sort of like, you know, that bringing IBC to other ecosystems is actually possible, which is now sort of changing the narrative of, hey guys, we don't need to sit around and think of the next sort of most sort of scalable slash quote unquote trustworthy trusted bridge. There's no such thing as a trustworthy trusted bridge. All trusted bridges are trusted, no matter what you say. And so from my perspective, like I want our focus over the next, multiple years to ensure that every chain that has volume and TVL and is something that, and of course, at some point we'll probably turn this over to the community for informing our decisions, but we're definitely keen on sort of like next year focusing on the Ethereum, Polygon integrations, Aptos integrations, and then from there sort of thinking about what other ecosystems make sense to integrate with. Because obviously, like picking these actual ecosystems to do these types of integrations is a really difficult decision, because these things, of course, take time for us to put together and for us to actually, ship to market. It also takes a lot of like political time to like push improvement proposals and speaking with the core protocol team. So we want to make sure sort of every decision we take is like super informed.
So this is a lot of alpha, actually. So what you also said is that potentially by the end of 2023, we could see that ETH 2.0, like ETH 2 is IBC enabled as well as Polygon. This was also a question from my end. Is it also, and I mean, you just answered this question. So it's technically possible to bring IBC to ETH, but how complicated is this, may I ask? And I mean, ETH 2.0 is not here, so yeah, what would be the stage here? What would be the way to proceed here? Very interesting to know that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also let Blas answer this too, but basically we need multiple EIPs to actually be passed to allow for signature schemes, introducing specific signature schemes. So we're hoping to start first with Polygon because hopefully they're more sort of receptive to these changes. And then if we can sort of demonstrate that this has worked on an EVM compatible chain like Polygon, then I think it'll be easier for us to actually sell these changes to the Ethereum Foundation and just, the Ethereum community. So yeah, I mean, the work that was done for the Harmony Cosmos bridge really focused a lot around this IBC Solidity package, and so hoping to piggyback off of that work to build out all the different parts necessary, and Blas can sort of go into that. But from a requirements perspective, I do think it makes sense that we start with somebody like Polygon who we can actually contact and have like an actual productive conversation with, and quick sort of turnarounds from a governance perspective before moving on to something where EIPs are very complicated to push through.
Yeah, maybe Blas, you want to pick this up?
Yeah, I mean, what else can I add? I think, Ethereum world, it is probably the most complicated one, or complex to get into. There's things related to cost, gas issues that they're more. We have to really do a lot of research. We have to think of different approaches, possibilities. We were discussing electrons work, for example, things like this that potentially can enable new chains. So I think the best path for us, the path of least resistance, is to add those chains that are more receptive because of their governance process, for instance, and then as we develop more experience, as we know how much everything costs running on an EVM world, for instance, because we did it on another chain such as Polygon. Then we can have a really good perspective and understanding on, okay, what is it that we need in order to go to Ethereum, and then that allows us to bring a proposal that is just quicker to accept, and that would not need iterations. So that's a bit like, I guess, the approach that we're going to take with Ethereum, but definitely it is something that I would love to have.
Yeah, and yeah, definitely. I think that would be like phenomenal, because if we just think about where we are now, and how many and how much TVL would flow into the interchain, then the discussion would rather be that, you know, everything just becomes the interchain, rather something joins the interchain, if that makes sense. So this is like very very interesting to follow. But now now let's go back to the light client aspect once again, because you, Susannah, you mentioned you would favorize the light client support approach to expand IBC further. But now, BrainJar, you mentioned, for example, that this is not possible with Solana, and maybe that's a hot take, but all of these chains that do not have light client support and wouldn't be able to implement IBC, while all the other chains are implementing IBC, or you guys are shipping it, better said. Where do you see the future for these chains that basically are isolated from the rest of the ecosystem if IBC would be expanded at this rapid rate as we see it now? So what are your thoughts on this, that some ecosystems like Solana are isolating themselves right now?
Yeah, I mean, to Susannah's point, you could definitely do like a solo client approach, but I think from my perspective, if your chain doesn't have a light client and you don't build your chain, even Aptos, which is, you know, a fundamentally like VC, you know, Solana 2.0 situation. By the way, I'm not like, yeah, Blas definitely disagrees with me on some of these items. But basically, like, I believe that any, you know, even Aptos in their white paper, they're describing why it's super important to have a light client. And they also mention trustless bridging in there as like something that they actually care about. So it is exciting to see the ecosystem basically evolve to understand the need for these things. I think chains that just don't have these things are just going to get pretty much like left in the dust. Especially as, you know, especially as you have like applications getting built that use multiple different ecosystems under the hood, using a framework like XCVM, for instance. Like, I just don't see a world in which a chain that has sort of no trustless bridging capabilities. Of course, you can use solo clients, but with a light client approach, I think is just, you know, just essentially going to limit their capabilities to really offer something novel to their users.
And Blas, do you agree now with that, or do you have another perspective on that? Blas, can you hear me?
Yes. Sorry. No, I totally agree. I think it's kind of like globalization and international trade. As you know, as we evolve, as the technology evolves, it's gonna be the only way to progress. And I just don't see, you know, chains coming up with new proposals that are attractive for people without, you know, looking at the entire ecosystem. Yeah, and just trustless bridging is probably the most attractive way to enable this.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, you guys are right. I would definitely be happy about the scenario. Before we pick up questions, like maybe Susannah, you want as a last comment, you want to add how you view the future involvement of IBC. Like, let's say it's 2023. I just want to draw a picture here, so to say. I just want to imagine, how will I use IBC in 2 or 3 years from now, Will I be just on Kepler, or will most of the wallets also have the function to leverage IBC? Will it be super user friendly that, for example, also my parents, would swap some tokens here and there on different chains? Like, what will the future look like? Let's draw maybe a very handy picture here.
I think like the long-term future, like first of all, I would see IBC becoming the standard for like cross-blockchain communication. But actually, I think when IBC is really successful, I mean, not that it is, I would say it's successful now, but actually you shouldn't have to be concerned with the fact that you're actually like using IBC. Like you'd either just be using a front end, and actually you'd be like for like an average user, you'd probably be interacting with like a few blockchains through a single interface, whether this is a wallet or just like a front end. I'm not sure, but I think it's more likely it would be a front end, because I think wallets are kind of more lightweight and just for like signing. I think like the functionality is probably going to be in like specific applications. But yeah, I think it should just be so seamless to do cross-chain transactions or kind of leverage the best features of different blockchains. That's this kind of like app-specific thesis of Cosmos, is to say you should have customization and optimization for a specific application. You shouldn't be able to do everything in the most effective way on a single blockchain. So therefore you need all of these optimized blockchains to be able to seamlessly communicate with each other. And I think when that is done in like a good way, you shouldn't even realize that you're like having to like actively like move your assets around or be like really concerned with exactly what blockchain you're on. I think that's for like mass adoption, really, because yeah, as you said, like your mum or your grandma's never going to really, blockchain's not really going to be taking off if you're having to like, be constantly thinking about like your seed phrase, or like you're signing a specific transaction, all of these like permissioning things. Like you can't expect like an average user to be getting on board with that, I think, in the long term.
Yeah, I think what I like about this is that you basically described what you also mentioned, this end game, this mass adoption end game, where people do not even recognize on which chain they are, with which chain they are actually interacting with, and that everything will be completely seamless and blockchain will be just the back end. I mean, nowadays also nobody is wondering how I pay with my credit card, how the money arrives somewhere.
Yeah.
It just works. And we use it. So yeah, very interesting point of view here. So now, before I pick up the first question, so just want to repeat this real quick. So BrainJar, you are working right now with Composable. So you are like prioritizing now the near and the Polkadot developments, but are also eyeing right now on ETH 2.0, Polygon, and all the other chains whenever they are ready or whenever they are on the roadmap, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Again, eyeing and researching. I don't want to make promises we can't keep. So, yeah, but definitely researching. Like, it is super important to us to push IBC to as many ecosystems as possible. And I think the logical next place to look is Polygon and ETH2 and Aptos, and yeah, so I think we're definitely on the right track with respect to research.
That's super exciting, and of course, yeah, you don't have to promise anything, but just the fact that we are like seeing the first experiments now is just lovely. Let's wrap today's interview up with one question that came in a while ago. In the future, Composable will have a substrate chain that supports Cosm, Wasm, and IBC light client bridging. How do you see the cross-chain narrative evolving when we start to see ecosystems converge? I don't know, maybe you, Blas, want to answer it, or BrainJar, up to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I gave a similar answer recently, where there's like the controversial answer, and then the sort of non-controversial answer. The controversial answer is basically, um, there essentially will be I don't really believe that there's going to be a huge need for, there's this concept of like 100 parachains in Polkadot. There's this concept of like 200 parachains in Kusama. If we're really truly operating in a world in which applications can speak to each other, do we need, uh, copy paste UniV2 forks on multiple different ecosystems? So I actually believe that the world of this kind of interoperability, uh, where interoperability actually becomes like a framework, that people actually build applications with, we'll start seeing next generation applications, who then will require their own chains. But I think very much so, protocols in the future should really prioritize on, let's use what's out there. Let's work with, XCVM, for instance, and tap into Osmosis as a DEX, tap into Pablo as a DEX on Kusama, tap into DYDX for derivatives trading, etc., and build something novel. So I don't believe really in this future where new protocol, if all of this, if IBC becomes as expansive as we're hoping it becomes, I believe that novelty in the ecosystem will increase dramatically, and I think as a result, the necessity to be your own chain right from the beginning, specifically, your own pair chain, uh, right from the beginning of your development cycle, I think will make less sense. I can very much so see an ecosystem where protocols will deploy onto our chain to do something interesting, like say options vaults on 2-3 different chains. And then if there's a scenario where they're clogging up our chain with a bunch of transactions, they can then choose to become, an application specific rollup or an application specific chain. So I think the app chain thesis itself is fundamentally kind of flawed from the perspective of, yes, we need applications to be their own chains, but I also am just hoping we get to a world in which the next bright idea uh, for a DeFi primitive, for instance, is not just automatically, thrown and categorized into this application specific chain thesis, but rather let's go use what's out there and build a really cool application that doesn't reinvent the wheel. And then if block sort of transaction requirements and constraints, transaction processing constraints become an issue, becoming your own parachain or your own Cosmos SDK chain, I think is a path to go down. So I think overall, like, this will really shake up the parachain ecosystem, I think, as well, where it's even more abundantly clear that anybody with a good idea tries to basically go and build a parachain. Like this, building a parachain and maintaining a parachain, maintaining a chain in general is like a huge pain. And so I think, with Celestia being so close to the Cosmos ecosystem, people are starting to see alternatives. You don't have these alternatives in Polkadot. So I think this idea of, hey, maybe don't spin up your own parachain immediately, like, think through this scenario first, will really permeate the parachain ecosystem. And we might see a world in which there's only, a few really important parachains such as us, and then a lot of applications live on those pair chains that are actually interacting with Cosmos more than Polkadot. But anyway, I'll leave that at. I won't go into the deep controversy of this, but that's my rant on this item.
Nice. Yeah, thank you so much for this, and also very good and detailed way to answer this question. So thanks for that. And also we are like getting closer to an hour. I think that's a perfect time to wrap it up. First of all, thank you guys so much for joining the panel today. Actually, I've really learned a lot, and huge shout out to you guys from Composable for shipping like crazy, for working so hard on expanding the IBC. Also, thank you, Susannah, for giving us once again the good understanding of why we need IBC. Also, some potential things that we have to keep in mind when bringing IBC to the broader crypto industry, that there are also some risks involved. We have to, and we have to have an eye on them. So yeah, very, very good episode, guys. Thank you so much. And we also mentioned some documentation here and there. So guys, all the guys who are listening and watching to this episode, you can find all of this in the description below. With that said, thank you, BrainJar. Thank you, Blas, and also thank you, Susannah. And thanks to you guys for watching. See you the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.